When Senator J.D. Vance called Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett ghetto on live television, he thought she'd get angry. Instead, she stayed calm, looked straight into the camera, and made history with what she said next. You could feel it in the air, sharp, heavy, already loaded before anyone spoke. 4 people sat around the glossy glass table, bright studio lights reflecting off their skin and nerves. The segment was supposed to focus on economic recovery in low-income communities, but as it always goes in these live panel debates, things took a turn. Senator J.D. Vance was doing what he does best, talking over people. He leaned in toward the mic that practiced smirk, hovering just below a furrowed brow, acting as if he was the only adult in the room. "Let's be serious," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Throwing money at bad schools and calling it reform? That's not progress." Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had been quiet for most of it, not because she didn't have anything to say, but because she knew how these panels went. Let the white men dig their holes, then show up with a shovel full of facts. So she waited. Then she leaned in. If by bad schools you mean underfunded, understaffed, and ignored by state governments, Jasmine said, then sure, let's throw all the money at them. Because communities that have been robbed deserve repair. A slight stir from the host, but she kept going. You talk about handouts, but what you mean is if it doesn't look like your world, it doesn't matter. And then it happened. J.D. Vance cut her off, voice raised, eyes narrowed. "You're just being ghetto," he said. The words were soft, almost casual, like he was just tossing a little seasoning into the conversation. But it hit like a rock thrown through a window. The air left the room. The other panelists froze. The host blinked twice. Viewers at home stopped mid-bite. You could practically hear a million remotes drop at once. It wasn't the word itself. It was the way he said it, like her whole existence had just been summed up in a slur disguised as commentary. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She took a breath, adjusted her mic with one hand, and then she locked eyes with the camera. "I'm not surprised you said that," she began, her voice level. "But cutting, because when black women speak with conviction, when we challenge power, we don't get to be assertive. We get labeled." J.D. shifted in his chair. You could see it. He knew he'd stepped in it, but it was too late. You hear ghetto, but I hear South Dallas. I hear survival. I hear my mother working 2 jobs, raising 3 kids, and still showing up to PTA meetings with food stamps in her purse and dignity in her walk. That moment, right there, that's when the clip started spreading. Before the segment was even done, the video was clipped, tweeted, shared, stitched, subtitled. Some people called her a queen. Others said she should have walked off set. Some folks, especially black women, just said, "Thank you." The panel tried to keep going, awkwardly redirecting to student loan policy, but no one was listening anymore. The whole internet was tuned into that one exchange. Jasmine stayed calm through the rest. But her hands, they told the truth, fingers tapping on the table like the sound of everything she wanted to say but didn't, because she knew better than to let them turn her into the angry black woman they were already expecting to see. Still, her message had already landed. People watching from Oakland to Tulsa to Tampa were sitting straighter. Women who had been called ghetto in office meetings, at school drop-offs, in boardrooms, were shaking their heads with that familiar burn behind the eyes. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was about something older, something deeper. It was about the kind of labels that stick even when you graduate, even when you win, even when you're sitting on a panel as a United States Congresswoman. And Jasmine Crockett? She peeled that label, off on live TV with steady hands and an iron voice. But what nobody saw was everything that led up to that moment. Before she was Congresswoman Crockett, she was just Jazz. No spotlight, no security detail, no suits stitched for national TV. Just a skinny girl with calloused hands from helping her uncle change brake pads in the heat of a South Dallas summer. South Dallas didn't offer lessons gently. It didn't whisper encouragement. It gave you everything raw. Either you learned to speak up, or you got drowned out by the chaos. Sirens, bus brakes, men arguing across corners, moms yelling for their kids to come inside before the streetlights blinked on. Jazz had two versions of her life, the one inside the house and the one outside. Inside, her mother Marlene ruled with a quiet intensity. She didn't yell, didn't need to. A glance was enough to shift the air in the room. Marlene cleaned houses in Highland Park 6 days a week and came home with sore wrists, bleach burns on her fingers, and just enough energy to make chicken and rice before collapsing on the couch with her church socks still on. Outside the house, Jazz walked the fine line between too smart and not real enough. She wore off-brand sneakers one size too small and used a gel cap for her edges that made her scalp itch. But she stood tall, always. She learned early that some people mistook survival for attitude. Some teachers looked at her tone, not her words. She saw it even back then. When she answered a question right, some folks were annoyed instead of impressed. Her first memory of being called ghetto didn't come from a kid on the playground. It came from a substitute teacher in 4th grade. Jazz had stood up to explain why Martin Luther King's work wasn't over, even though the worksheet said, "Mission accomplished." The teacher chuckled under her breath and said, "Well, aren't you a little firecracker? Real ghetto fabulous?" She didn't even know what ghetto fabulous meant at the time, but it didn't sound like a compliment, not the way it was said. At home, she told her mom. Marlene didn't storm into the school. She didn't write a letter, she just said, "Next time, finish your point and say it louder." That was all Jazz needed. In high school, she joined the debate club, not because she liked arguing, but because she was tired of people acting like her ideas needed a translator. She wanted to get good at saying things in a way that couldn't be ignored. She wanted to win arguments, not with volume, but with truth. She did. By the time she got to Prairie View A&M, people knew her name, and not because she had the best clothes or the most followers, but because she had this way of calling people out that didn't leave them angry. It left them speechless. The South Dallas in her never left. She carried it into classrooms, then courtrooms, and eventually Capitol Hill. It showed up in how she wore her hair, how she asked questions that made people squirm, how she remembered names others forgot. People warned her to tone it down. Don't come off too bold, they'd whisper before meetings. Don't dress too loud. Don't talk about where you're from like it's a badge. But she didn't tone down. She tuned in, listened harder, and paid attention. Because that badge, it came with stories, real ones, about girls like her who got overlooked, about boys her age who never made it past 22, about moms who juggled 2 jobs and a bus route just to make a school conference. And when she spoke, she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for all of them too. So when J.D. Vance threw that word at her on national TV, he didn't just insult her. He insulted every Sunday hairpress, every after-school job, every stacked milk crate bookshelf in every corner of South Dallas. But childhood lessons don't always prepare you for how it feels on a national stage. By the time Jasmine Crockett finished law school, she already knew the law wasn't blind. It squinted hard, especially at people who look like her. Her first job out of Texas Southern's Thurgood Marshall School of Law wasn't glamorous. No mahogany desks or Capitol briefings. She started at a cramped public defender's office in Shreveport, Louisiana, where the AC barely worked and the coffee machine groaned louder than the copy machine. But that's where she learned how real justice, or the lack of it, worked. Every Monday morning, the waiting room was full of faces that looked like her cousins, her uncles, her high school classmates. Boys caught with dime bags get more time than white men with priors. Mothers losing custody because they couldn't afford proper childcare. Grandmothers taking the fall for mail fraud they didn't understand. Jasmine never got used to it. She just got sharper. In court, she spoke fast, clear, and with purpose. No fluff, no showmanship, just facts, delivered like a punch you didn't see coming. Judges leaned forward when she talked. Even the prosecutors who couldn't stand her started respecting her grind. Still, it wasn't just the courtroom battles that shaped her. It was what happened outside of them. She once got pulled over driving. Home from court, still in a blazer and heels, briefcase in the passenger seat. The officer didn't care. Said she looked out of place, asked her who the car belonged to. That's when she realized, degrees didn't shield you, respectability didn't save you. So she stopped trying to play nice with systems that weren't built for her in the first place. Jasmine moved back to Texas and launched her own practice. She defended tenants getting bullied out of their apartments. She helped expunge records for kids who got swallowed up by the system before they even hit 18. She stood by women escaping abusive relationships who had nowhere else to go. Word spread. Not just because she won cases, but because she showed up. Not in power suits or polished sound bites, but with time, with heart, and with truth. She remembered her clients' kids' names. She called mamas to explain paperwork line by line. She stayed late. She followed up. And the people noticed. When a city council seat opened up in Dallas, folks started whispering her name. At first, she laughed it off. I'm not a politician, she'd say. But deep down, she was already building something bigger than a career. She was building trust. Then came the George Floyd protests. The air was thick with grief, and the streets overflowed with people who were tired of being polite about injustice. Jasmine didn't just march. She represented protesters who were arrested. She got them out. She stood in court and said what needed to be said. Even when judges rolled their eyes, that's when everything shifted. A group of organizers approached her with a plan. Run for the State House, challenge the old guard, bring the fight inside the room. She was hesitant. Running for office meant more cameras, more scrutiny, more people calling her too loud, too black, too ghetto behind closed doors. But then she thought about her mother, about the girls in her neighborhood, about the courtroom stacked against them. She said yes. Her campaign didn't have the most money, but it had momentum. Volunteers knocked on doors in 100-degree heat. Teenagers passed out flyers after school. Elders donated 5 bills from envelopes marked for groceries. She won, and then she won again, eventually landing in the U.S. Congress, where her voice would carry even further. But the halls of Congress weren't made for her either. She walked in and saw the stairs, saw the double checks at security, heard the whispers when she wore her curls or asked hard questions in committee meetings. They tried to box her in, to mold her into something safer. But Jasmine kept showing up just as she was. A South Dallas girl with courtroom grit and a memory like steel. That's what made her dangerous. Still, no degree, no bill, no title could shield her from what was coming. Next, after the show ended, the lights dimmed and everyone filed off the set like nothing had just cracked open on live TV. The producers pretended they hadn't heard it. The makeup assistant gave Jasmine a soft smile and walked away too quickly. Even the host avoided her eye. Jasmine unclipped her mic slowly. Her hands were steady, but her stomach, it was turning over. She'd been insulted before. In courtrooms, online, even by fellow lawmakers. But not like this. Not that word. Not at that moment. Not said with such casual venom in front of millions. You're just being ghetto. It wasn't just what he said. It was how easily it rolled out of his mouth. Like it had been sitting on the edge of his tongue the whole time, waiting for an excuse to spill. He said it like he wasn't afraid. Like he thought it would land. Silence. Her, maybe even score him a few laughs from the folks at home. But instead, it hit differently. Because he didn't say, your argument is flawed or you're wrong. He went straight for the identity, straight for the stereotype. Jasmine sat in the back of the rideshare heading to her hotel, watching the clip on her phone. It had already been uploaded, sliced cleanly into 30 seconds of fire. Her name was trending. Again. Her phone buzzed every few seconds with messages, tags, reposts. She scrolled. Some people were cheering, others were mocking. She saw one tweet that read, "This is why we don't let them on panels." That one hit harder than the insult itself. Back in her hotel room, she kicked off her shoes and let herself breathe. The room was too quiet, too cold. She turned on the TV just for the noise, flipped through a few news channels. On one of them, they were already dissecting the exchange. A middle-aged pundit said she overreacted. Another smirked and said, well, the term ghetto has evolved. She muted the screen. It would have been easy to fire off a statement. Her team was texting her. We can draft something fast. But Jasmine didn't want to rush it. Not this time. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed and replayed her own words in her head. You hear ghetto, but I hear South Dallas. She didn't raise her voice, didn't point fingers, didn't storm out. She responded with clarity, precision, and weight. And now she had to decide how much more to say. Jasmine pulled out a yellow notepad she always kept in her bag, old habit from trial prep days. She scribbled thoughts, not bullet points, just pieces. Why is it ghetto when I speak plainly, but authentic when he yells? Why do I have to dress like I'm in church to be taken seriously? Why are we still pretending code words aren't real? She didn't sleep that night. Not out of rage, out of responsibility. She knew too many girls were watching, too many teachers would replay that clip in class tomorrow. Too many mothers would sit their daughters down and say, that's why you gotta keep your voice calm no matter what they say to you. And she hated that, because no man, senator or not, should get to redefine you in a moment and expect silence in return. By morning, her inbox was flooded. Civil rights attorneys, journalists, even a retired librarian who said, you gave us the words we never had. She sat by the window, watching the sun climb over the Los Angeles skyline, and decided. She would speak again, but not in the way they expected. Not a soundbite, not a thread, not a press conference with perfectly chosen phrases. She'd speak in her own language, one built from barbershops, kitchen tables, and city bus conversations. Because this wasn't about clapping back anymore. This was about setting a line and making sure it stayed drawn. But going viral has a cost too, especially for a black woman. They thought she'd disappear for a few days. Let the moment pass, let the outrage burn out like it always did. Some advisors even whispered that silence might be the smarter move. Let the news cycle handle it, one suggested. Don't feed it more attention. But Jasmine had learned something long ago in courtrooms and community centers. Silence doesn't protect you. It just gives someone else a chance to write your story. And this time she wasn't about to let that happen. By the second day, news outlets had already spun the narrative a dozen different ways. A conservative blog ran with the headline, Crockett overreacts, plays race card on live TV. One anchor on a primetime show used air quotes while calling her aggressive. Social media lit up with edited clips, cutting out the insult entirely and painting her response as an unprovoked rant. But they underestimated something. People were watching the full clip, not just the fragments, not just the spin. And when they did, they saw a woman stay calm in the face of a cheap shot. They saw poise, restraint, and fire under control. By day 3, something unexpected started happening. People who didn't normally wade into political discourse started speaking out. A retired judge from Des Moines posted on Facebook, if you think Jasmine Crockett was out of line, you've never sat in a courtroom where black women are forced to smile through disrespect. A high school principal in Fresno showed the clip in a civics class, asking her students to write reflections. Half the girls quoted Jasmine's line about her mother, food stamps in her purse, and dignity in her walk. And a young activist from Albuquerque stitched the video on TikTok and said, I don't know her personally, but this was for us. Then, the celebrities chimed in. A Grammy-winning singer tweeted, don't let anyone shame you out of where you come from. Congresswoman Crockett, we see you, an actor posted on Instagram, this is why representation matters. She handled it with more grace than I could have, but even more powerful were the stories flooding her inbox. Long, emotional messages from women who had lived through their own moments of being called ghetto, loud, unprofessional, too much. One woman wrote, I work in HR. I code switch every single day just to be palatable. Watching you not shrink made me cry in the break room. Another message came from a grandmother in Mississippi who said she never finished school but raised 3 daughters who all went into education. You reminded me of them. You reminded me that holding your head up is a form of resistance. Still, not everyone was celebrating. Backlash grew louder in other corners. Conservative commentators accused her of weaponizing identity politics. Others mocked her for bringing up her background as if pride in one's roots were some kind of weakness. Then came the subtle retaliation. A congressional aide leaked that several lawmakers were discussing her temperament behind closed doors. Another source claimed she might be too polarizing for future leadership roles. She wasn't shocked. She'd seen it before in law, in politics, in life. Black women weren't allowed to respond. They were expected to absorb, endure, and move on without making too much noise. If they did clap back, even with facts, they were angry. If they smiled through it, they were performing. Jasmine wasn't performing anything. She was surviving and doing it in public. Her team scheduled an interview, not with a major cable network, but with a local station in Fort Worth where she'd grown up visiting cousins. She chose that outlet on purpose because this moment wasn't just national, it was personal. When the anchor asked what she thought of the backlash, Jasmine didn't dodge. "I've been told my whole life that I'm too much," she said. "Too direct, too passionate, too loud, too black, too ghetto, and I'm done apologizing for any of it." She leaned in just a little, not for theatrics, for clarity. If that makes people uncomfortable, maybe they should ask themselves why. But the real storm came when she decided to respond, publicly. 3 days after the incident, Jasmine Crockett sat in a small sunlit room with a basic webcam, no ring light, and a chipped ceramic mug by her elbow. No fancy production crew, no polished script, just her voice, a wooden chair, and a message she needed to say without anyone filtering it. The video started without music or fanfare. "Before I say anything," she began, "I want to be clear. I wasn't going to respond like this, but I've felt your stories, and this moment isn't just mine anymore." It wasn't a press release, it wasn't even a rebuttal. It was something else entirely, more personal, like a kitchen table conversation after the world had just sucker punched you and you were still deciding whether to cry or keep cooking. She didn't name J.D. Vance, not once. She didn't have to. "I've heard words like ghetto, unprofessional, angry my whole life," she said. "And I used to think that if I dressed right, spoke softly, got the degrees, won the elections, that one day those words would stop chasing me. But they don't. They just show up in new suits." She paused, like the silence itself held weight. "I wasn't offended because I've never been to the ghetto. I was offended because I have, and I know exactly what that word means when you say it like that. It's not just a label, it's a cage, a way to clip someone's wings before they ever fly." The comments poured in instantly, thousands every minute. Teachers writing about their students, moms showing the video to their daughters, men who said they'd never understood how deep that word cut until now. But what really set her message apart was how it moved away from just defending herself. She invited the conversation forward. "I'm not asking for sympathy," she said near the end. "I'm asking for honesty, because until we're honest about who gets labeled and why, we're just dressing up the same old disrespect in different words." The video passed 1 million views in under 2 hours. By sunset, churches were replaying it to youth groups. A group of nurses in Milwaukee watched it together on break. It made it onto sports radio, into classrooms, into family group chats. It was no longer just a political moment, it was a cultural one. The next morning, a pastor in Cleveland delivered a sermon called "Dignity in the Fire," based entirely on Jasmine's words. A Detroit hairstylist told a local news station, "This woman said what we all were holding in, and she didn't just say it, she made it plain." A youth basketball coach in Tallahassee paused practice to gather his players and play the clip through a Bluetooth speaker, telling them, "This is how you carry yourself when they come for you." Even journalists who hadn't paid much attention before started quoting her, but none of that was the reason Jasmine knew it had landed. She knew because of one text message. It came from a woman named Clarice, from Amarillo. No verified checkmark, no following. Just a screenshot of her 12-year-old daughter standing at the dinner table, holding a printed copy of Jasmine's quote. She said she's going to use it for her school speech. The text read, "Thank you for saying it out loud." And right then, sitting in her office, Jasmine felt it. Not pride, not relief, responsibility. Because when you speak like that, when you hold your ground with grace and let your voice carry past the moment, it stops being about winning the debate. It starts being about who hears you and who gets stronger because you didn't shrink. She leaned back in her chair, folded her hands and let herself breathe. Not because it was over, but because it was just beginning. But what came next wasn't a headline. It was a reckoning. At first, J.D. Vance brushed it off. He didn't apologize. He didn't clarify. In fact, the morning after the debate, he doubled down in a radio interview. "Some people are too sensitive these days," he said. "If that's offensive, maybe politics isn't for her." He thought he could spin it into a toughness narrative that he'd just been blunt, straightforward, that she'd taken it the wrong way. But this wasn't just a political misstep. It had become a cultural flashpoint, and the people watching weren't forgetting. By the end of the week, it wasn't just voters who were watching. Sponsors for his upcoming book tour started pulling out quietly. A university in Oregon canceled a scheduled speaking engagement, citing community concerns. A tech conference in Seattle removed him from a keynote panel. One of the event organizers even tweeted, "We can't ask black women to speak on our stages, then turn around and host someone who disrespects them like that on national TV." His team scrambled. They released a bland 3-line statement saying he respects all his colleagues and regrets any misunderstanding. But the damage was already in motion. And this time, it wasn't just about hurt feelings. It was about what he revealed, and what it said about the spaces where people like Jasmine had to fight to be heard. Behind closed doors, congressional aides leaked that the fallout was causing real friction. In one private meeting, a senior advisor reportedly told him, "You made it harder for all of us. This isn't going away." And then something rare happened. 2 of his own colleagues, both Republicans, released separate statements condemning his language. Neither used his name directly, but both referenced the importance of respectful dialogue and the need to avoid racially charged, dismissive terminology. It wasn't a wave of condemnation, but it was enough to show that the ice under his feet was beginning to crack. More than the media fallout, it was the everyday people who kept the fire burning. Constituents in Ohio began writing letters not just to his office but to local newspapers. A high school senior published an op-ed in the Toledo Blade titled, "Why My Congressman Should Apologize to Jasmine Crockett." She wrote, "I've grown up hearing that certain ways of speaking, dressing, or even moving are ghetto, but nobody ever defines what that means. They just use it to keep us small. What Jasmine Crockett did was remind me that I don't have to shrink." The piece went viral. J.D. Vance for once went quiet. His public appearances were scaled back, press requests were declined, he stopped engaging on Twitter altogether, and while his base stayed loyal, the broader public mood had shifted. Something about the moment stuck in a way he clearly hadn't anticipated, because it wasn't just what he said, it was what it revealed. People were tired of watching black women in positions of leadership carry the full weight of grace, restraint, and intelligence, only to be dismissed with a single word that tried to pull them back down. And Jasmine, she wasn't gloating. She didn't post memes, didn't issue a statement demanding an apology. She stayed on her message, kept working, kept showing up. In fact, when reporters asked her during a press scrum if she had anything to say to J.D. Vance, she looked up from her folder and replied calmly, "I already said it, and I said it the first time with clarity." And then she walked off. But the ripple had already reached him. And the truth was, no amount of spin could make people unsee the clip. No strategic silence could erase the impact. The label he tried to slap on her ended up sticking to him instead. Not because of one moment, but because it finally exposed a pattern. But Jasmine didn't celebrate. She kept her focus elsewhere. 2 weeks later, Jasmine Crockett stood in front of a crowd of high school girls in Tulsa, Oklahoma. No cameras, no press, just metal folding chairs in a gymnasium that smelled faintly of floor wax and popcorn from the vending machine. The girls wore every kind of expression, curious, skeptical, tired, distracted. Some were half listening, whispering and twirling their braids. But one thing Jasmine had learned, young people can tell when you're putting on a performance. So she didn't. She started like this. I'm not here to talk down to you. I'm not here to be the famous lady from TV. I'm here because I've been where you are, sitting in a room where no one thinks you're listening. That got their attention. She told them about growing up in South Dallas, about being the only one in a courtroom who looked like her, about being talked over in meetings and smiled at with condescension. And yes, she told them about the insult. The moment J.D. Vance called her ghetto on national television, the room got quiet. One girl near the back raised her hand. "How did you not cuss him out?" she asked, her tone half joking, half admiring. The gym filled with soft laughter, but Jasmine smiled gently. "Because I wasn't talking to him," she said. "I was talking to you. I was talking to every girl who's ever been told to speak softer, to be less, to smile more. If I had exploded, they would have ignored my words and focused on my volume. So I gave them words they couldn't ignore." Another student asked what she would say if she could go back in time to when she was their age. Jasmine looked at the rows of faces, different shades, different stories, and said, "I'd tell myself that respect isn't something you chase by changing who you are. It's something you claim by standing exactly as you are." The students clapped. Some of them stood. After the talk, a girl named Kiara walked up quietly, while others took selfies or lingered near the snacks. She didn't ask for a photo, just pulled a small notebook from her backpack and held it out. "I wrote poems," she said, "but I stopped because someone told me my writing sounded too ghetto." Jasmine flipped to one of the pages. It was raw, honest, and beautiful. "Kiara," she said softly, "if that's what ghetto